Meghan and Harry arrived smiling. The crowds went wild. But behind the carefully choreographed welcome, something was already unraveling that the palace never wanted the world to see. The tour that was supposed to change everything. There are trips that are purely logistical. Flights booked, schedules arranged, handshakes exchanged, and everyone goes home. And then there are trips that carry weight. Trips that are designed to do something much larger than fill a calendar. Trips that are meant to send a message, shape a narrative, and settle a question that has been quietly circulating in rooms where powerful people speak carefully. The October 2018 royal tour of Australia, Fiji, Tonga, and New Zealand was very much the second kind of trip. It was not simply a tour, it was a statement. And understanding what that statement was supposed to say, and what it ended up revealing instead, is where this story truly begins. Go back to the beginning of 2018. Harry and Meghan had married in May of that year at Windsor Castle, in a ceremony that captured global attention in a way that even veteran royal watchers had not fully anticipated. The crowds were enormous. The emotion was genuine. The images that went around the world carried a warmth and an energy that the royal family had not generated in quite that way for a very long time. For a brief and brilliant moment, the monarchy felt new. It felt relevant. It felt like it had found something it had been quietly searching for. Meghan was a large part of that feeling. She was different from anyone who had married into the royal family before. She was American. She was biracial. She was a working actress with her own career, her own public profile, and her own very clear sense of who she was and what she believed. She did not arrive at the palace doors as a blank canvas waiting to be shaped by the institution. She arrived as a fully formed person, and for millions of people watching around the world, that felt exciting. But institutions do not always experience excitement the way the public does. Inside the palace, the excitement was real, but it was also accompanied by something else, a watchfulness. A careful, measured attention to how Meghan was being received, how she was navigating royal expectations, and how the relationship between her instincts and the institution's requirements was going to develop over time. The warmth was genuine, but so was the scrutiny. By the time autumn 2018 arrived, several months had passed since the wedding. The initial wave of global goodwill was still present, but it was beginning to settle. The press coverage, which had been largely celebratory in the immediate aftermath of the marriage, was starting to shift in tone. Stories about Meghan that were less flattering were beginning to surface. Questions about her relationship with palace staff were beginning to circulate. The narrative, carefully managed for months, was showing its first signs of strain. The Australia tour was meant to reset all of that. That is the part that has never been said clearly enough in the years of coverage that followed. The tour was not just a diplomatic exercise, it was a relaunch. A carefully planned opportunity to remind the world why it had fallen in love with Harry and Meghan in the first place. To put them in front of enormous, enthusiastic crowds in a part of the world that had responded to them with extraordinary warmth. To generate the kind of images and moments that push difficult stories off the front page and replace them with something that serves the institution's interests. The planning was extensive. Weeks of preparation went into the logistics alone. Venues, security, scheduling, wardrobe, press access, official engagements, and the delicate business of managing two royal households worth of competing priorities. All of it had to be coordinated across multiple countries and multiple time zones. The scale of the operation was significant, and at the center of it all were two people who were, by the account of those who observed them closely during this period, already navigating a great deal more than the public could see. Because here is the detail that the official tour narrative never fully addressed. Meghan was pregnant, not publicly yet. The announcement would come on the first day of the tour, timed with characteristic royal precision to generate maximum positive coverage and set the emotional tone for everything that followed. But the pregnancy was known privately, before the plane ever left British soil. And that private knowledge, the physical reality of what Meghan was experiencing in her body during an extraordinarily demanding international tour, is essential context for understanding everything that happened next. Traveling while pregnant is demanding for anyone. Traveling while pregnant as a new member of the royal family, under constant public scrutiny, across multiple countries and time zones, with a schedule packed so tightly that rest was a luxury rather than a given, is something else entirely. And doing all of that while also managing the internal pressures of a palace that was watching very carefully, measuring every gesture, every word, every interaction against a standard that had never been properly explained to her, was the reality behind every smiling photograph taken on that tour. The crowd saw the smiles, and the smiles were real, but they were not the whole story, not even close. What was happening behind the scenes, in the quiet moments between engagements, in the conversations that did not make it into any official account, in the decisions being made and the tensions being managed, and the things being said and left unsaid, that is the story that has taken years to fully surface. And it starts, as so many royal stories do, not with a dramatic confrontation or a visible crisis, but with something much quieter, a sense, shared by more than one person close to the tour, that something was not quite right. That beneath the color and the crowds and the carefully managed warmth, a pressure was building that the itinerary could not contain and the smiles could not disguise. The tour that was supposed to change everything did change everything, just not in the way anyone had planned. What the cameras did not capture. There is a version of the Australia tour that exists in photographs. It is a beautiful version. Meghan, in a series of elegant outfits, moving through crowds of people who traveled hours just to catch a glimpse of her. Harry beside her, relaxed and proud, the kind of ease on his face that people who had watched him for years said they had not seen before. Thousands of Australians pressing against barriers, holding handmade signs, reaching out for a handshake or a brief word, genuinely moved by the presence of two people they felt they already knew. That version is real. Those moments happened. That warmth was genuine. But cameras have edges, and everything that happened just beyond those edges tells a very different story. The behind-the-scenes reality of the 2018 Australia tour began revealing itself almost from the moment the schedule went into full operation. The days were long, extraordinarily long. Engagements were stacked in ways that left almost no room for the kind of recovery time that any traveling person needs, let alone a pregnant woman in her first trimester crossing multiple time zones. Sources who were present during the tour, speaking in the years that followed, described a pace that felt relentless even by the demanding standards of royal travel. But the pace was only part of it. What those same sources describe, carefully and with the kind of measured language that people use when they are telling the truth, but are also aware of the consequences of telling it too loudly, is an atmosphere that carried a tension not fully explained by exhaustion or jet lag, or the ordinary friction of a complex logistical operation. The tension had a shape, and that shape, when you map it carefully using the accounts that have emerged over time, points in a very specific direction. Staff dynamics. The relationship between Meghan and the staff supporting the tour became, by multiple accounts, one of the defining undercurrents of those weeks, in a way that nobody in an official capacity was prepared to acknowledge at the time. Reports that surfaced in the months and years following the tour painted a picture of an environment where communication was strained, where expectations on both sides were not always clearly understood, and where the gap between how Meghan operated and how the palace machinery expected its members to operate was producing friction that the official schedule could not absorb. Now, this requires careful handling, because the story of Meghan and palace staff has been told in ways that range from sympathetic to deeply unfair, depending entirely on who is doing the telling and what their relationship to the institution is. What can be said honestly is this: Meghan came from a world where directness was a professional virtue. Knowing what you wanted and communicating it clearly was not considered demanding. It was considered efficient. It was considered respectful of everyone's time. The royal household does not always operate on those terms. The palace has its own rhythms, its own unwritten codes, its own ways of doing things that have been refined over generations, and that are not always explained to newcomers, royal or otherwise. The expectation, often unstated, is that new members of the family will observe, absorb, and gradually adapt. The learning curve is real, and it is steep. And it is made steeper still by the fact that almost nobody inside the institution will tell you directly when you are getting something wrong. They will simply note it and remember it. For Meghan, who was simultaneously navigating pregnancy, international travel, relentless public scrutiny, and the daily reality of operating inside an institution whose internal culture was still largely opaque to her, that learning curve was not a gentle slope, it was a wall. And the tour brought her face to face with it, in ways that the smiling photographs absolutely do not convey. Scheduling decisions became a source of tension that multiple sources reference, without always agreeing on the details. There were reportedly disagreements about the structure of certain engagements, about the amount of time built into the schedule for rest and recovery, about the way certain requests were handled or not handled, about the gap between what Meghan felt she needed to perform at her best and what the institution's machinery was configured to provide. None of this was visible to the crowds. None of it made it into the official photographic record of a tour that, from the outside, looked like an unqualified triumph. The images released each day were luminous. The coverage in the Australian press was largely ecstatic. The public response was everything the palace had hoped for when the tour was planned. By every external measure, it was working exactly as intended. But there is a detail that surfaced later, one that speaks to the gap between the public face of the tour and its private reality, that is worth sitting with. During the tour, at least one significant conversation took place between members of Harry and Meghan's team and palace officials back in London. The nature of that conversation has never been fully disclosed, but sources who have spoken about it in general terms describe it as a conversation about management, about how the tour was being experienced from the inside, about concerns that were being raised and needed to be heard. That conversation did not resolve everything. It may not have resolved anything. And the fact that it needed to happen at all, in the middle of a tour that was supposed to be the royal family's triumphant relaunch of its newest and most globally compelling members, tells you something important about the state of things beneath the surface. There were also moments during the tour that did not go according to plan in ways that were visible, at least partially, to outside observers. Moments where the choreography slipped slightly, where the carefully managed presentation of harmony and purpose showed a seam. Small moments, individually easy to dismiss, but collectively, for those who were paying close attention, they added up to something. A picture of two people doing an extraordinary job of presenting one reality to the world while living a rather different one behind it. The cameras captured the joy, the laughter, the connection with the crowds, the tears of people who had waited hours to be close to them for 30 seconds. What the cameras did not capture was what happened when the doors closed, when the schedule paused, when the performance, because all royal public appearances are in some sense a performance, was allowed to drop for a moment. What happened in those moments, according to people who were there, was complicated. And it was in those complicated moments that the real story of the Australia tour was being written. Not in the official engagements, not in the carefully timed pregnancy announcement, not in the front pages of Australian newspapers carrying images of two radiant people at the height of their global appeal. In the quiet, in the tension, in the things that were said and the things that could not be said. In everything the cameras never saw. Stay with us. Because what Meghan was experiencing personally during those weeks goes far deeper than scheduling friction or staff dynamics. And understanding it requires understanding the full weight of what she was carrying into every single room she walked into with a smile on her face. Meghan, at the center of the storm. There is something that people rarely talk about when they discuss the Australia tour. Not the outfits, not the crowds, not the pregnancy announcement that sent the global press into a frenzy of warm coverage on the very first day. Something quieter than all of that. Something more personal. Something that requires you to set aside the official version of events for a moment and think about what it actually means to be a human being inside a situation of that magnitude. Meghan Markle, in October 2018, was in her first trimester of pregnancy. She was exhausted in the way that only first trimester exhaustion can make a person. The kind of tiredness that does not respond to sleep because it is not really about sleep. It is about a body redirecting every available resource towards something profound and demanding that is happening entirely on the inside. Morning sickness, hormonal shifts, the particular emotional vulnerability that early pregnancy brings, even in the most stable and supportive of circumstances. Meghan's circumstances during that tour were not the most stable, and the support, while present in some forms, was not always arriving in the ways she needed it most. Think about what her days actually looked like. She would wake, often earlier than her body wanted, in a hotel room in a city that was not her home, in a country that was not her country, preparing to spend hours in public under the kind of scrutiny that most human beings will never experience at any point in their lives. Every expression would be analyzed. Every outfit would be critiqued. Every interaction with the crowd would be filmed from multiple angles by people whose job was to find the moment that told the most interesting story, whether or not that story was the true one. And she would do all of that while feeling, in her body, everything that first trimester pregnancy feels like. Then she would smile, and the smile would be genuine. Because Meghan is, by the accounts of people who know her well, someone who genuinely connects with people, someone who finds real energy in human interaction, someone who was moved, authentically moved, by the crowds that turned out for her across Australia and the other countries on the tour itinerary. But genuine does not mean effortless. And the effort required to sustain that level of public presence across that many weeks, in that physical condition, under that degree of institutional and media pressure, was enormous. Sources who observed her closely during the tour describe a woman who was pushing through in ways that were not always visible, but were absolutely real. The pregnancy announcement itself deserves attention, because it was, in the way that royal announcements always are, a carefully calculated decision as much as a personal one. The timing was deliberate. Announcing on the first day of the tour served multiple purposes. It generated an immediate wave of positive coverage that set the emotional tone for everything that followed. It gave the media a story that was unambiguously joyful, something the palace needed at a moment when less flattering narratives about Meghan were beginning to gain traction in certain corners of the British press. And it positioned Harry and Meghan at the start of a new chapter in a way that felt both personal and strategically sound. But here is what that timing also meant. It meant that Meghan spent the entire tour as a pregnant woman in the public eye, with all the scrutiny that brings, in addition to everything else she was already managing. Every photograph would now be examined for signs of a baby bump. Every food choice at official engagements would be noted. Every moment of visible fatigue would be interpreted through the lens of her condition. The announcement that was designed to protect her, in a sense, also amplified the attention on her body and her health in ways that added another layer to an already overwhelming experience. Sources close to Meghan have spoken, in careful terms, about how she was feeling during this period, not just physically, emotionally. The picture that emerges is of a woman who was beginning to feel, in ways she could not yet fully articulate, that the institution she had married into did not quite know what to do with her. Not in a dramatic, confrontational sense, more in the quiet, daily sense of feeling like the systems around you were not designed with you in mind. Like the support structures that existed had been built for a different kind of person in a different kind of situation, and that the gap between what those structures offered and what she actually needed was growing rather than shrinking. That feeling is important because it did not arrive suddenly. It was not the result of a single incident, or a single conversation, or a single decision that went wrong. It accumulated, slowly, day by day, engagement by engagement, in the small moments where things that should have been simple were not simple, in the interactions that left her feeling more alone in the middle of an enormous operation than anyone watching from the outside would ever have guessed. There was also the matter of the media coverage, specifically aimed at her during the tour. While the Australian press was largely warm, the British press was already operating on a different frequency. Stories that had been building for months about Meghan's relationship with her father, Thomas Markle, about her half-sister's public criticisms, about her adjustment to royal life, were running alongside the celebratory tour coverage in ways that created a jarring contrast. Publicly, the tour was a triumph. In the British tabloids, the questions and the insinuations were continuing regardless. Meghan was aware of that coverage. Of course she was. And being aware of it, while simultaneously being required to present a face of serene happiness to thousands of people who had come specifically to celebrate her, required a degree of emotional compartmentalization that takes a real toll over time. People who have spoken about this period in Meghan's life, people who knew her before the royal family and stayed close to her through this transition, describe someone who was genuinely trying, who was genuinely committed to making it work, who believed, at this point in the story, that the difficulties were temporary, that the institution would find its footing with her. that the press would eventually settle, that the gap between who she was and what the palace needed her to be could be bridged with enough time and enough goodwill. She was not wrong to believe that. It was a reasonable belief. But the Australia tour, for all its external success, was also quietly teaching her something she had not yet fully learned. That reasonable beliefs and institutional realities do not always move toward each other. Sometimes they move in opposite directions, and sometimes, no matter how hard you smile, or how genuinely you connect with the crowds, or how carefully you try to navigate the machinery around you, the gap does not close. It widens. Meghan left Australia with her global profile at its highest point. The images from the tour would be among the most celebrated of her royal career. The public response had been extraordinary. By any external measure, she had succeeded magnificently. But something had also shifted, something quiet and significant, and not yet visible in any photograph or any headline. A realization, beginning to take shape, that the tour that was supposed to settle her place in the royal family had instead revealed, at least to her, how unsettled that place still was. She did not say that publicly. Not then. But the people who were paying attention, the ones who were watching not just the photographs but the person behind them, could see something changing in those weeks. And Harry, standing beside her through all of it, was watching too. Which brings us to a question that nobody around the tour was asking loudly, but that everyone was feeling quietly. What was this doing to him? Harry's impossible position. There is a particular kind of pressure that does not have a name. It is the pressure of standing between two things you love, watching them pull in opposite directions, and knowing that no matter what you do, someone is going to feel the cost of it. It is not dramatic in the way that public arguments are dramatic. It lives in the quiet, in the decisions made late at night, in the conversations that circle the same ground without ever fully resolving. That is where Harry was during the Australia tour. Harry had spent the better part of his adult life performing a version of himself that the institution required. He was good at it. He connected with people in ways that were real. His work with wounded veterans, his mental health advocacy, his willingness to speak publicly about grief and struggle in ways that royal men simply did not do. All of that had built him a reputation for authenticity that was genuinely earned. But authenticity has limits inside an institution that runs on protocol. And by October 2018, Harry was beginning to feel those limits in ways that were becoming harder to manage quietly. The central tension of his position was not complicated to describe, even if it was extraordinarily complicated to live. On one side was Meghan, his wife, pregnant with their first child, navigating an experience that was more demanding and more isolating than either of them had fully anticipated. A woman who needed him to be present in a way that went beyond the physical, who needed him to advocate for her inside a system that did not always advocate for her, naturally. On the other side was the institution itself, the palace machinery, the apparatus of advisors and officials, and long-established ways of doing things that had been operating long before Harry was born. An institution that had its own understanding of how the tour should go and what the appropriate response was to the frictions emerging behind the scenes. Those two sides were not always speaking the same language. Harry's role officially was to represent the crown, to fulfill the engagements, to stand beside his wife and present the image of a united, purposeful royal couple. He did that. He did it well. The photographs show a man genuinely proud of the woman beside him and genuinely invested in the work they were doing together. But beyond those photographs, Harry was doing something much harder. He was trying to protect someone he loved inside a system that was not designed to accommodate the kind of protection she needed. Without a clear map, without a precedent he could point to, without a senior member of the family who had navigated anything remotely similar and could offer guidance from genuine experience. Sources who have spoken about Harry during this period describe a man who was alert in a way that went beyond normal royal alertness, watching, assessing, reading rooms and conversations for signs of friction that he knew was there even when it was not visible, tracking how Meghan was doing in real time, not just as a husband does naturally, but with the particular attentiveness of someone who understands that the person beside him is operating at the edge of what is sustainable. That kind of vigilance is exhausting in its own right. There were moments where Harry pushed back, where he raised concerns about the schedule, about the pace, about how certain situations were being handled. The response he received was consistently the institutional response, measured, professional, acknowledging his concerns without fundamentally changing course. That pattern would repeat itself in the months and years that followed until it became impossible to contain quietly. There is also the family dimension. William was not on the tour, but his reservations about the pace of everything had been communicated in ways that Harry heard clearly. Those reservations landed heavily. They added another layer to an already complicated emotional landscape that Harry was navigating largely alone. He was managing his marriage, his wife's well-being, his relationship with the institution, and his relationship with his brother, all simultaneously, across multiple countries, in front of the entire world. And quietly, beneath all of it, a question was forming. A question about what he was willing to accept. About where the line was between loyalty to an institution and responsibility to the woman he had chosen to build his life with. He did not have the answer yet, but the Australia tour made sure he could not stop asking. And in royal life, the questions you cannot stop asking have a way of eventually demanding answers that change everything. What the tour really revealed. Some stories only make sense in reverse. You live through them forward, managing each day as it comes, telling yourself that things will settle, that the friction is temporary, that the gap between what you need and what you are being given will close with enough patience and goodwill on both sides. And then time passes, and you look back, and suddenly, every moment that felt isolated and manageable reveals itself as part of a pattern that was always pointing somewhere specific. The Australia tour is that kind of moment. Looked at in isolation, in October 2018, it was a success. The crowd sizes were extraordinary. The coverage was largely celebratory. The pregnancy announcement generated exactly the wave of warmth the palace had calculated it would. By every external measure, the tour delivered what it was designed to deliver. But looked at from the distance of everything that followed, it was something else entirely. It was the moment when the central tension of Harry and Meghan's royal life stopped being theoretical and became lived. When the gap between the institution's version of their story and their own experience of it became wide enough to feel every single day. When the questions hovering quietly in the background moved to the foreground and refused to go back. The exhaustion Meghan carried through those weeks was not just physical. It was the exhaustion of a woman beginning to understand that the effort required to exist inside this institution was not going to decrease with time. It was going to increase, and the support available to her was not going to grow to meet that demand. It was going to remain fixed, institutional, configured for a different kind of person in a different kind of situation. Harry understood that too, perhaps before he was ready to sit with what it meant. What the tour revealed underneath all its color and warmth was a structural incompatibility, not between two people and a system that had survived for centuries by absorbing or removing whatever did not conform to its requirements. Not cruel in any simple sense, but not flexible in the ways Harry and Meghan needed it to be. And here is what makes the Australia tour historically significant rather than simply personally painful. It was the first time that incompatibility became undeniable. Before the tour, it was possible to frame the difficulties as a settling-in period, as ordinary friction of a new member finding her footing, as something that time and goodwill would gradually smooth out. People inside the palace used that framing. People who loved Harry and Meghan used it. Even Harry and Meghan themselves reached for it in their most optimistic moments. The tour made that framing very difficult to sustain, because what happened across those weeks was not the friction of someone finding their footing. It was the friction of someone who had already found her footing and was discovering that the ground the institution was offering was not ground she could stand on sustainably. That is a different problem, and it does not resolve with time. Sources who reflected on this period describe a shift that became visible in the final days of the tour, a quality of tiredness that went beyond jet lag, a quietness between engagements that felt heavier than rest. The smiles at the final engagements were as warm as the smiles at the first ones. But something behind them had changed. Not broken, not gone, but changed in the way things change when a person has learned something they cannot unlearn. When the gap between the life you are living and the life you are able to sustain has become real enough to feel, but not yet large enough to act on. Harry and Meghan left Australia as the monarchy's most celebrated couple, but they carried back something the tour had given them that no official itinerary had planned for. A clarity, still quiet, still unspoken in its fullest form, but real. The tour that was supposed to settle their place in the royal family had instead revealed, with quiet precision, exactly how unsettled that place truly was. Some turning points announced themselves loudly. This one did not. It arrived quietly, in the middle of something that looked like a triumph, and changed everything anyway. If this story moved you, drop a comment below and tell us what you think really happened behind those palace doors.